Each bar in the energy pyramid indicates the amount of energy present at each trophic level in a given time or annually per unit area. So the entire sequence of communities that successfully change in a given area is called as a sphere. So the climax community remains stable as long as the environment remains unchanged. Hello everyone, a warm welcome to today's session on chapter 14 of 2nd PUC, that is Ecosystem. I'm Dr. Divya, Biology faculty, Vidhyaashram University College, Mysuru Temple of Excellence. So in the previous session of this chapter, we had discussed about two important components of the ecosystem, that is decomposition and energy flow. In today's session, we shall continue with the energy flow, wherein we'll study about the energy flow in the pyramid, that is the pyramid of numbers, pyramid of energy and so on. And also we shall study about ecological succession. So to begin with, let us start with ecological pyramids. What are these ecological pyramids? So you all have seen pyramids, right? That is the Egyptian pyramids that are standing tall till today. So those pyramids are just like a triangle. They are pointed at the tip and at the base they are broad and they are flat, right? So similarly, the food chain or the food web or the different trophic levels, in particular to say the different trophic levels in these food chains and food webs can be depicted by using ecological pyramids. So the base of the pyramid is broad and it narrows towards the apex, that is at the tip it is narrow. If you can see here the base, so this is the base of the pyramid which is broader, and as you go up the slope and you reach the tip, it is narrower at the tip or the apex. Apex is nothing but the tip. So similar shape is expressed in the food of energy relationship. So similar shape is expressed in the food or energy relationship between organisms at different trophic levels. So each organism at different trophic level is usually represented by ecological pyramids, which is having a broader base, and as and when it moves higher to the upper trophic level, it becomes narrower and becomes pointed at the apex. So this relationship is expressed in terms of number, biomass or energy. So that is why we have three types of ecological pyramids. One is pyramid of number, pyramid of biomass and pyramid of energy. So pyramid of number, as I told you, in different trophic levels, which is the first trophic level that is there, the producers, right, which form the base. After the producers, we have the primary consumers, then we have the secondary consumers, then we have tertiary consumers, like that it goes on. So pyramid of numbers means the primary consumers, you can count them. When you count them, they will be more than the secondary consumers. So the producers will be more than the primary consumers. Therefore, the producers which lie at the base, so these are the producers, which are the plants. Remember the previous session wherein we had learned the producers are the plants. So they are more in number. Plants are more in number on this planet, right? So they are more in number, therefore they have a broader base. And as we go up, we have the consumers, that is the primary consumers. So these primary consumers are nothing but the herbivores. Their number is lesser than that of the plant. Next, as we go up, we have the secondary consumers. So secondary consumers are the carnivores. So they are even more lesser in number when compared to the primary consumers. So that is why the pyramid gets pointed as it reaches the higher levels. And it can be also detected in biomass, that is the weight. So obviously weight also, the producers will be more in weight. Why? Because they are more in number, obviously they will be more in weight. So based on weight also it can be found out, and based on energy. Energy also we know, right? Because the energy in the producers is very high. As it goes up, some of the energy is lost and it is lesser than that of the producers. That is the primary consumers will get less energy because only 20% energy moves from here to here, right? Next 20% will move from here. So that is why every time some amount of energy is given back or lost to the environment. Therefore, when it reaches to the apex of the pyramid, the energy that that particular organism occupying the highest trophic level, it will be very, very minimal, or it will be less. So therefore, it can be depicted as pyramid of energy as well. So each of these we'll study in detail in the coming slides. So the base of each pyramid, as I told you, it represents the producers or the first trophic level, while the apex, that is the tip of the pyramid, represents the tertiary or the top level consumer. The three types of ecological pyramids that are usually studied are pyramid of number, we have pyramid of biomass, and pyramid of energy. So these three let us study in detail. So next let's study about the pyramid of number. So here also there are different trophic levels, wherein the lowest trophic level is occupied to a large extent by the producers. So here we have the producers, which are the plants. So they occupy the first trophic level. And when we say pyramid of numbers, we should know that here the number of individuals is counted. Like in a particular area, how much amount of plants are there, how many number of plants are there, and in the next trophic level in a particular area, how many number of the primary consumers are there, how many number of the secondary consumer. Here you're counting it, you're giving numbers to it. So that is why it is called as pyramid of number. So say for example, here in producers, the first trophic level is occupied by the plants. So in that particular area, there are about 58,42,000 plants, that is the producers are present. And as and when it moves to the next trophic level, so moving to the next trophic level, the plants will be eaten by the primary consumers, which are the herbivores. So how many number of herbivores are there in that particular area? It is about 7,08,000. So 7 lakh are there. Can you see the drastic difference here? It was 58,42,000 and here it is just 7,08,000. So a drastic difference, right? So the number of herbivores is less when compared to the number of plants occupying the next trophic level. So that is why the base of the pyramid is broad here, and as and when it moves up, the number of individuals in each trophic level tends to decrease. That is why the pyramid, it looks like a pyramid shape. So that is the reason. So if you draw a line like this, it looks like a pyramid shape. So next, moving to the primary consumers will be eaten by the secondary consumers, which are the carnivores. So carnivores, if we take the number of carnivores that are present, it is just 3,54,000. So drastic difference. Next, moving to the higher trophic level where there is the tertiary consumers. So say for example, the vultures, one of the example for tertiary consumer, they are just 3 in number, very, very less, right? So that is about the number of individuals. So here what did we understand from this? This is also an upright pyramid because the number of producers in a given area is more, and as and when the trophic level increases, the number of organisms in that particular trophic level tends to decrease. So therefore, pyramid of numbers in a grassland ecosystem wherein only 3 top carnivores are supported in an ecosystem based on the production of nearly 6 million plants. So if an area 6 million plants are there, don't think that 6 million carnivores or tertiary consumers will be present. No, there is a drastic decrease in the number of population and in terms of pyramid of numbers as and when we move in each trophic level. So next one is pyramid of biomass. So in pyramid of biomass also, I told you here weight is considered, right? So the weight is what usually is taken is the dry weight is considered, which is kilograms per meter square. So dry weight is considered. So here also P for it is producers, right? The first trophic level will be occupied by the producers, which are the plants. So they are more in number. So here we are not more in weight, right? Obviously because they are more in number. Then when we take the dry weight collectively of all the plants in that particular region, the dry weight will be more itself. So it is 809 kilogram per meter square. So, per meter square of area or per square meter of area, when you take the weight of the plants that are present there, it will be 809. For example, they have given a number 809. So, next moving on to the next trophic level where it will be the primary consumers, right? The primary consumers. So, primary consumers, it will be the herbivorous animals. So, they are lesser in weight because their numbers are also lesser, very drastically lesser when compared to that of the producers. So, lesser in weight, that is 37 kilogram per meter square. Next, moving further, we have the secondary consumers. So, secondary consumers will be the carnivores. So, they are even more lesser in number, that is 11 kg per meter square. Next, moving to the tertiary consumers, they are just 1.5 kg per meter square. So, what did we understand here? The pyramid of biomass shows a sharp. So, the pyramid of biomass shows a sharp decrease in the weight or in the biomass as it moves to the higher trophic level, wherein the lower trophic level occupied by the producers will have a higher weight and the least weight is seen in those occupying the higher trophic level, that is the tertiary consumer. So, this is what we understood. Next, moving on to the inverted pyramid of biomass. Again, this previous example that I took was of terrestrial organism, that is land, but it is different in the case of water. So, pyramid of biomass in an aquatic ecosystem is different when compared to a terrestrial ecosystem. So, this was the example we took of terrestrial ecosystem. In terrestrial ecosystem, it is a straight pyramid wherein lower level is occupied by the producers and next primary consumers, secondary consumers, tertiary consumers, like that. But in an aquatic ecosystem, so if we take the example of a aquatic ecosystem, here we have an inverted pyramid. Can you see an inverted pyramid? The lower trophic level is smaller in number, the higher trophic level is larger in number. This is only seen in an aquatic ecosystem. So, the pyramid of biomass, say for example, we'll take the example of sea. Sea is an aquatic ecosystem, right? It is a marine ecosystem. So, the pyramid of biomass in sea is generally inverted. Why is it inverted? Because it is the ulta of the pyramid of biomass of the terrestrial ecosystem. Can you see here? Because it is inverted, because the biomass of fishes far exceeds that of the phytoplanktons. That is true, right? In a pond ecosystem or in any water body, the producers here will be the phytoplanktons, because phytoplanktons are the photosynthetic free floating plants that are there, small minute plants that are there in the aquatic ecosystem. So, phytoplankton. So, they are just less in number. So, they are that is 4, or if it's not less in number, less in weight here, because I am talking about biomass, they are just 4 kg per meter square. Next, if I take these phytoplanktons will be eaten by the primary consumers. What are the primary consumers here? They are the fishes, right? Fishes are the primary consumers. So, these fishes are more in number when compared to the phytoplankton. That is, it is or more in weight. Biomass here again 21 kg per meter square. So, that is why we have an inverted pyramid. So, always remember, when we talk about pyramid of biomass, it is a normal pyramid in the case of terrestrial ecosystem, but when it comes to an aquatic ecosystem, the pyramid of biomass is always inverted because the number of producers or the weight of the producers is far less when compared to the weight of the primary consumers or the number of primary consumers. So, that is the reason why it is inverted pyramid of biomass in the case of aquatic ecosystem. So, now you know the normal pyramid and the pyramid of which is inverted, right? You know the difference now. So, next talking about pyramid of energy. Here at each trophic level, how much amount of energy is passed from one trophic level to other is considered. So here pyramid of energy is also upright. So here all the pyramids that we discussed, they are upright in position, wherein the producers will be larger, the base will be larger, and as it goes up, it decreases, right? But only in an aquatic ecosystem, the pyramid of biomass is inverted. That we came to know, because the base is smaller and as it goes up, it increases. So that is why. So pyramid of energy is always upright and it can never be inverted, because when energy flows, why? Because energy that is there at the lower, be it a aquatic ecosystem or terrestrial ecosystem, the first occupying organisms will always have more energy. Energy will only be lost as and when the energy flows from the base of the trophic level to the higher levels of the trophic level. So that is why, because energy flows only in one direction, that is, it is unidirectional. So that is why the pyramid of energy can never be inverted. It is always upright. And here in each step, some of the energy is lost in the form of heat. That in energy flow we have studied in the previous session. So have a look at it. So each bar in the energy pyramid indicates the amount of energy present at each trophic level in a given time or annually per unit area. So at one particular time, say for example, you're calculating the amount of energy flow per month, or you can calculate per year. It depends on what type of experiment you're conducting. So here also again, and energy always it is expressed in joules, that is J for, so J, which is nothing but joules. So this is a unit for measurement of energy, Joules, joules. So here also, as and when we move. So first trophic level is occupied by the producers. So producers will receive energy from the sunlight. So they'll receive about 10% energy from the sunlight. All that we have learned, right? Though only 20% is photosynthetically active radiation that is absorbed from the sunlight. Out of the 20%, only 10% is required for the plants. So producers will take up 10% energy. That 10% energy is nothing but 10,000 joules of energy is there in the producers. Now, when it moves up, the producers will be eaten by the primary consumers, right? The primary consumers. What are the primary consumers? The herbivorous animals. So when the energy moves from the producers to the primary consumers, some of the energy is lost in the form of heat, and therefore only 1000 joules of energy will remain in the primary consumer. Next, from primary consumer, it will move to the secondary consumer. So in the secondary consumer, again here from this, some amount during the process of movement of energy, some amount is lost in the form of heat, and therefore the amount of energy in the secondary consumer that is there is 100 joules. Next, talking about the tertiary consumers. Again, when it moves to the tertiary consumer, some amount is lost in the form of heat. So therefore, the amount of energy remaining in the tertiary consumer is 10 joules. Can you see here? Energy from the producers was 10,000 joules, but by the time it reached the tertiary consumers, they had only 10 joules of energy. Can you see now? So again, we need to understand, should we become vegetarians or non-vegetarians? So here that also we can think of that now. So here, because producers, the green plants will have lots of energy stored in them when compared to that of the primary, secondary and the tertiary consumers. So this is about the pyramid of energy, and always, because energy flows unidirectional, it will not flow from top to down, it only flows from the base of the trophic level to the higher trophic levels. That is why, because it is unidirectional only in one direction, the pyramid of energy is always upright. It stands upright and it can never be inverted, as in which that is we had seen in the pyramid of biomass in an aquatic ecosystem, right? So this was about pyramid of energy. So moving further, let's study about the limitations of ecological pyramid. So anything that is there in science has its own advantages and disadvantages, right? But here we are not talking about disadvantages. We'll just look into what are the limitations of the ecological pyramids. So ecological pyramids does not take into account the same species belonging to two or more trophic levels. Say for example, carnivores. Carnivores, when I talk about carnivores, for example, we human beings are carnivores, right? We feed directly on the plants also, and we feed directly on the animals also. So there is a confusion. Where should we put man? Should we put him in the secondary consumers? Should we put him in the primary consumer, or should we put him in the secondary consumer, or should we put him in the tertiary consumer? So that is why, because no two species belonging to two or more trophic levels are put in the same trophic level, that is why it creates a lot of confusion. That is one of the limitations of ecological pyramids. And it assumes a simple food chain, something that almost never exists in nature. That is true, right? A simple food chain never exists in nature, because in nature we do not have a simple food chain. We have a food web. So what is the difference between a food chain and a food web? I'll just brush up here once again. So food chain means it is simple. Simple food chain means it is simple, wherein we have the producers. From the producers it will move on to the consumers. Those consumers, say for example, we have plants. The plants will be, as we had studied earlier, the plants will be eaten by the animals, that is the herbivores, right? These herbivores, I'll write it as H. These herbivores will be eaten by the carnivores again. These carnivores can be eaten by the omnivores. Now, here, these carnivores will also die and decay. These herbivores will also die and decay. And these omnivores will also die and decay. The plants will also die and decay, leading to, what is that? Adding on to organic matter in the soil. So when it adds on to the organic matter in the soil, these organic matters will again be utilized by the plants. This is a food chain that we see. But again here, we don't know that these animals, say for example, the plants will be eaten by the herbivores such as insects. Right? I'll write it as insects here. Again, these insects will be eaten by the, say for example, lizards. The lizards will be eaten by the birds. Birds will be eaten by the carnivores. Carnivores can directly be eaten by the omnivores, or the plants can directly be eaten by the omnivores. Like this, it is a web which is complicated. That is, the ecological pyramids was not able to explain. So they assumed that only ecological pyramids, they constructed only keeping a simple food chain in mind, and they forgot that in nature, not just a simple food chain exists, but there is a complicated food web that also exists here. So that is why that they could not look into. So that is one of the limitations of ecological pyramids. And in ecological pyramids, saprophytes are not given any place at all, right? Because saprophytes are also responsible. They come under a particular trophic level, because whatever the saprophytes decompose, that will be utilized by the plants again. So no place, nowhere, so many ecological pyramids we had studied, and nowhere they had mentioned about the saprophytes, that is the decomposers such as the microorganisms, right? So because no place was given to the saprophytes in ecological pyramids, even though they play a very, very important role in the ecosystem, because the availability of nutrients to the producers is not just from the sunlight, even it is from the soil, because of the decomposition mechanism that is carried out by the saprophytes. So but no place at all was given for the saprophytes. So therefore that was also one of the limitations. So these were the limitations of ecological pyramid. But still today, these ecological pyramids holds a good position in studying various ecosystem behavior. So next, talking about ecological succession, which is a very interesting topic. Why? Because every now and then you travel to different places, you will find this ecological succession. So that is one of the beauty of ecology or studying biology, because everywhere you go or travel, you just try to find something that is related to biology. And likewise, ecological succession here. So an important characteristic of all the communities in nature is that their composition and structure tends to change constantly in response to the changing environmental conditions. That is true, right? one day you might find a area which was abundant with trees and shrubs and herbs and all that. But after many years, you just travel again through that area, it would have got converted into a barren land, or it would have got converted into a desert. Why? Because of human intervention also, and because of the changing environmental and climatic conditions, these changes occur. So each and every organism living on this planet, they tend to change. We are not stagnant. Everything tends to change as the year passes. So that is nothing but ecological succession. That is one of the important characteristics of the living organism. So this change is orderly and it is sequential, parallel with changes in the physical environment. So as and when the physical environmental changes, say for example, as and when the rainfall annually decreases, then that area will start to become barren, which was once luscious green, it will start to become barren, or it will start to become a desert, right, because of inadequate availability of water. So that is how, based on the physical environmental conditions, the change in the ecosystem tends to occur. So these changes lead finally to a community that is near equilibrium with the environment, and that is called as a climate community, and they will reach a stage which is called as climax community, where they'll reach a stage of equilibrium wherein further they will not change. Say for example, a desert now it is a climax community. It cannot come back into a fertile land. It cannot be brought back into a land which is filled with trees, never. So that is when it at certain point it reaches an equilibrium, which is called as the climax community. The simple example of a forest, the Bandipur forest, a part of the Bandipur forest got burnt, right? And how much tree species were lost? It almost looked as if it was barren. But now again you go back, again they have started to renew, and they renew and reach a point wherein they reach a climax community. So climax community means first only one particular species would have occupied that particular area, or that area would have been completely barren, and over the years of time other species tend to occupy that area and it will become a complete forest reaching a climax community. Or a desert, that area would have been a very good fertile area with lots of trees, but because of the drastic climatic changes, especially regarding the precipitation or the annual rainfall, that area would have been converted to a desert. So that is how, that is also a climax community. So the end of a ecological succession always ends with a climax community. So the gradual and fairly predictable change in the species composition of a given area is called as ecological succession. Say for example, in a pond, first it would have been a clear pond with all the aquatic plants, the aquatic animals in it. But later on what happens, the soil from the banks will start accumulating in the pond, and in that pond a island will get formed. Just like an island, it will get formed, and there the trees will start growing and it will spread, and over the years what happens, the pond itself might get disappeared and that aquatic ecosystem will become a terrestrial ecosystem. So that change that occurs in a given area is called as ecological succession. So during succession, some species tend to colonize or occupy an area, and their population becomes more numerous, whereas the population of other species decline and even disappears. Say for example, in a forest which has been burnt completely, the trees will disappear. But after few years, when you go and see there, you can find those trees would have been completely disappeared, but in the place of trees, grasses, shrubs and herbs would have occupied completely. So that also is one of the properties of ecological succession, where earlier one species would have been there in that area, but because of ecological succession, the other species which have started growing in that area will start to occupy and colonize that area completely, therefore becoming more in number when compared to the pioneer species. Pioneer species means those species which were present. Say for example, we have a rock. On a rock also you have seen sometimes, right, how grasses grow. So that grasses that are growing on the rock will be the pioneer species. That is the first form species. Maybe after 10 years you go and see there, small shrubs would have started growing on the grass, right, or small herbs would have started growing on the rock, which only had one or two grasses growing on it. So that is how now the grass is completely occupied or colonized by the small herbs. So that is nothing but the one of the properties of ecological succession. So the entire sequence of communities that successfully change in a given area is called as a sphere. As I told you, in a given area, say for example desert, sometimes the desert which is somewhere nearer to a water source or something, it might get occupied by the grasses which have been brought by the flowing water currents. After the grasses, it will get occupied by the herbs, then by the shrubs, then by the trees. Like that particular community which have successfully changed. And one more example I can take of is a pond. That pond will be just a water body with aquatic organisms, that is aquatic animals and plants. Over a certain period of time, because of the accumulation of the sediments, continuous accumulation of the sediment, what happened? It will become a small area, that is a small terrestrial area will develop on the land or on the pond, or a island will start developing on the pond. On that, first the grasses will grow, or the mosses might grow, then the grasses will grow, then the shrubs will come, the herbs will come, the trees will come, and finally it will spread and cover the entire pond ecosystem, right? So that particular change in a particular area, it is called as sphere. So when we say sphere means, earlier it was some kind of a region, now it got converted because of ecological succession, that is a sphere. So the individual transitional communities are termed as spheral stages or spheral communities. So first pond, again I'll take the example of pond. So first what was a spheral community there? It was nothing but the filling in of the sediments. It will just fill, sediments will get filled, and only you can see the formation of the land in the pond. And later on, next what will happen? Next you'll have the moss. Moss is growing on that particular land. Now it is occupied by the moss. Next we can find the herbs. It is occupied by the herbs. So they are called as the spheral stages or the spheral community. So the first spheral stage was the moss. This next spheral stage is the herbs. Next spheral stage will be the shrubs. Next will be the trees. Like that it gets occupied. So they are called as, so different stages, they are called as the spheral stage or the spheral communities. And in the successive spheral stages, there is a change in the diversity of species of organisms and increase in the number of species and organisms, as well as increase in the total biomass as well. That's true, right? Here again, the complete ecology of that particular region or sphere will change because it will be occupied by the different communities or different species of organism, leading to difference in the ecological pyramids. So this was about ecological succession, and the succession is hence a process that starts in an area where no living organisms are there. That is true. Succession can be from in an area where no living organisms were there at all. The best example is a barren rock, which I gave you in the previous slides when explaining. So here, based on that, there are two types of ecological successions. One is primary succession and the other one is secondary succession. So primary succession means here in a particular area no organisms at all were growing, but later on the organisms started to grow there. That is a primary succession. Example, a bare rock. So we have a bare rock where you can see no plants growing on that. So these are the pioneers. Pioneers means first form. Which is a pioneer here? This particular grass or the pteridophyte species that you can see here is the pioneer. So which plant grows on this particular barren rock for the first time? That will be the pioneer plant, and it is an example for primary succession. Next, moving on to secondary succession. Now, areas that somehow lost all the living organisms that existed here. There. Best example that we can take of is forest fires. So whenever there is a forest fire, what happens here is that area will be completely demolished. The plants and all will die and that area will be completely barren. But is it a primary succession? No, because first itself there were plants there. The plants got destroyed because of some climatic factors or human intervention. So next, after the destruction, next after few years, plants will start occupying that particular area, right? That is called a secondary succession. So here we have taken the example of forest, a burnt forest and a forest that is filled with trees. So burnt forest is an example for a secondary succession because it gets occupied, because in the burnt forest earlier itself plants were there, it got burnt, but after few years again the plants will start to develop. So that will be the secondary succession. So that is difference between primary succession and secondary succession. In primary succession earlier itself nothing was growing, for example barren rock, but a plant started to grow there, which is primary succession. In secondary succession, earlier the plants were growing there, but it got destroyed, and later on again after few years because of good environmental conditions, the plants again started to grow back. That is the secondary succession. So next, talking about the primary succession in detail. So some of the examples we have taken here. So examples of areas where primary succession occurs are some of the examples, that is newly cooled lava, and we have newly created pond or a reservoir. So wherever the lava has flown, there it is completely barren, right? Now there new plants will have to develop. So this is one of the best examples. So in lava rocks, this is one of the best example for primary succession. Then we have the primary succession, if you can see here on the rock, barren rock also there is primary succession, and in a pond also there is the primary succession. The pond wherein it was completely empty, it got occupied by the lotus plant. So that is primary succession. So the establishment of a new biotic community is always slow, meaning primary succession is always slow when compared to the secondary succession, because secondary succession already would have had the plants growing there earlier, but in primary succession there was no plants at all growing. So that is why formation of primary succession or formation of a new biotic community on a barren area is actually a slow and a time consuming process. So before a biotic community of diverse organisms can become established, there must be formation of soil. So that is the reason. Say for example, on a lava, that is the region where the lava has flown, there it will completely become solidified and rock-like, no soil at all. It should take millions or thousands together of years for the soil particles to come and settle on that. Because of wind and all that, the soil particles will come and settle on that, and once the soil particle comes and settles, from somewhere a seed or something will come flying and fall on the soil, and then the plant will start to arise there. So it is a long procedure, and it is a very slow procedure. So depending mostly on the climate, it takes natural process several hundred to several thousands of years to produce fertile soil on bare rocks, because from somewhere it has to come and sit on the bare rocks if a particular plant has to grow there. So therefore primary succession is always time consuming. It may be hundreds of years or thousands of years it may take. So next, talking about secondary succession. So secondary succession begins in areas where natural biotic communities have been destroyed, such as in abandoned farmlands, burned or cut forest, lands that have been flooded. So abandoned farmlands means earlier plants were there, but because it was abandoned, the plants got destroyed and it became barren. Burned or cut forest means there also earlier plants was there, but because the forest got burnt or it was cut by human beings, it became barren. Next again, lands that have been flooded. So those lands also earlier plants were there, but because it got flooded by the heavy rains, the plants got completely destroyed. But earlier plants were there in all these areas, right? But since some soil or sediment, but in spite of that, some soil or sediment is still present in that particular area. So therefore, paving way or giving way for the development of new plants very easily. So that is why secondary succession is faster than the primary succession. That is the reason, because in primary succession there was no soil at all. The soil should come from somewhere, or because of weathering of rocks, the soil should get formed and then the plant should develop. It is a long process. But in secondary succession, already soil is present in that area, therefore giving way for the development of new plants in a faster rate. So that is the difference between primary succession and secondary succession. So ecological succession usually focuses on change in vegetation. That is true, right? Because ecological succession, like change in vegetation in a farmland, change in vegetation in a forest, in a pond. So based on change in vegetation, the ecological succession depends. However, these vegetational changes in turn, they affect the food and shelter for various types of animals. Therefore, ecological succession can also be a threat to various types of animal species that are dependent on a particular type of food in that particular area. So thus, as succession produces, the number and also the types of animals and decomposers present in that area also changes drastically. And at any time during primary or secondary succession, which can be because of natural process due to climatic factors, or which can be because of human intervention such as forest fire, deforestation, etc. They can convert a particular serial stage, of succession to an earlier stage. Means a secondary succession can also get converted into a primary succession or a primary serial stage because of human intervention and also because of climatic factors. So that also possibilities are there. For example, even in lava, say for example volcanic eruptions, there earlier trees were there, but after the volcanic eruptions happened, wherever the molten lava flows, there the trees will get completely destroyed and also soil will be lost, because that entire area will become solid, that is, it will become solid in the form of rocks, right, porous rocks. Therefore, sometimes the secondary succession can go back to primary succession as well. Also, such disturbances creates new conditions that encourages the growth of some species, but in majority of the cases it can discourage or it can eliminate other species as well. So that is what happens here. So ecological succession can be of high importance also to some of the species, but ecological succession can bring a drastic reduction, or it can just eliminate or wipe out a species from a particular serial community or a serial area. So this is about ecological succession. So let's study about the succession of plants. So when we talk about the succession of plants, there are two types of succession here. One is hierarch succession and xerarch succession. So hierarch succession means the succession that takes place in wet areas. That is where water availability is there, and the successional series progresses from hydric to mesic condition. Mesic condition means both wet and dry areas. Hydric means entirely wet. Say for example, we have marshes. Those marshes earlier were completely hydric. They were completely filled with water. But because of ecological succession, they got converted into a marshland. That is, a hydric environment became a mesic environment there. Next, talking about xerarch succession. So xerarch succession takes place in dry areas and the series progresses from xeric to mesic condition. Here also in deserts, it was completely dry. Later they got occupied by the cactuses. From the cactuses, small grasses start to develop, then grasses, then herbs started to develop, then shrubs, later on occupying that particular area. So that is nothing but from xeric to now it is both it became from xeric it got converted to a mesic environment. So therefore, the ecological successions can convert a hydric and a xeric environment to a mesic environmental condition. So next, let's talk about two important concepts, that is pioneer species and climax community. I've used these terms while explaining in the previous slide. So pioneer species. So pioneers means first formed. They are the pioneer species. So the species that invades a bare area called as pioneer species. Say for example, this is a bare rock. This is a rock that you can see here. They are occupied by mosses, right? So now this moss will be the pioneer species. Or if they are occupied by lichens, the lichens will be the mosses, and lichens can be the pioneer species here. So means first nothing was there, it was barren. And the first plant that grows there, that will be the pioneer species. So that is called as pioneer species. So the species that invade a bare area are called as pioneer species. So in primary succession on rocks, these are usually lichens which are able to secrete acids, and these acids will dissolve the rock and therefore helping in withering of the rock and soil formation. So what happens here? There is a bare rock where nothing was growing. So first the lichens which are there. So you can see lichens growing on the rock, right? So these lichens, they will start growing on the rock. So the lichens will be the pioneer species. These lichens, they release some acidic substances, and these acidic substances are capable of decomposing the rock and weathering the rock to form soil. Now when soil is formed, it will get occupied by mosses, then by the pteridophytes, then by further plants will come and occupy there. So therefore the pioneer species best example is lichen here. And these later pave way to some very small plants like bryophytes, which are able to take hold in the small amount of soil. So next what here? Bryophytes. Mosses, they are nothing but the bryophytes. So what happened here? Lichens, they release a particular acidic enzyme that is capable of weathering the rock and converting the rock into some amount of soil. So in whatever small amount of soil is there, using that soil, the mosses will start to occupy next. So which is the pioneer species here? Lichen is the pioneer species. Now I hope you have understood what pioneer species is. So this will further increase and form the climax community. Now the mosses will die and decay. Those mosses will add on to the humus on that particular rock, and that will increase the fertility of the rock, and further again the soil will get added on the rock, and then the small herbs will start to grow, shrubs will start to grow, trees will start to go, reaching a climax community. Now you understood from pioneer community how it will reach a climax community. So they are with time succeeded by higher plants, and after several more stages, ultimately a stable climax forest community is formed. Just imagine from this bare rock, the pioneer species got formed. These pioneer species paved way for the secondary species. Then later on, the herbs, shrubs and all that started to form on this, and ultimately leading to a climax community. Can you imagine how this bare rock could get converted into a forest like this? It's a climax community. That is, a forest gets formed on just one piece of rock that was there. So the climax community remains stable as long as the environment remains unchanged. So it is a quite a stable condition until human intervention occurs or environment changes. So that is a climax community. With time, the xerophytic habitat gets converted into mesophytic one. Just like that, the same way, the xerophytic habitats also will have a pioneer community, wherein xerophytic habitat is completely a desert. Next, the cactus will form. The cactus, the grasses will form. From the grasses, later it will develop like that, and it will become an entire forest over a period of several years. So that is how it reaches the climax community. So in primary succession in water, the pioneers, so we'll discuss about like what kind of pioneer species and climax community is seen in a hydric environment, that is in a water condition. So in primary succession in water, the pioneer species will be the small phytoplanktons, that is the free floating small plants which are there, which are replaced with time by rooted submerged plants then rooted floating angiosperms will start to develop, then free floating plants will start to develop, then the reed swamp will form, then the marsh meadow will form, then the scrub will form and trees will form. Remember in hydrax succession how it had formed, the same way here. First what it will be, the pond will be occupied only by the phytoplanktons which are free floating. These phytoplanktons later on, next it will be occupied by the submerged plant. Now what is there here? Phytoplanktons are also there, submerged plants are also there. Next it will be occupied by the submerged free floating plant stage. So here in the pond now what is there? Phytoplankton, submerged plants and submerged free floating plants will be there. Next it will be occupied by the reed swamp stage. Reed swamp stage means some of the completely rooted plants that are there, they will develop. It will form the reed swamp stage. After that, the marsh meadow stage will form because of accumulation of soil, because of the plants that are present, they will start dying and decaying, adding on to the accumulation of the soil. Therefore, a marsh meadow stage will form. After the marsh meadow stage, what happens? Because of the filling of the pond with the dead and decaying matter and the sediments, the soil and all that, the trees, small herbs and all will form. Finally, it will form a forest. This is how a hydric environment forms a mesic environment now. That is the pioneer species and climax community. So, here will be the pioneer species. The pioneer species will be the phytoplankton. The forest will be the climax community. So, that is how in a aquatic ecosystem it can occur. So, the climax again would be a forest here, and with time the water body is completely converted into a land, and primary succession is a very slow process taking maybe thousands of years for the climax to be reached. So, from having nothing on that particular land, from a barren rock or just a pond with phytoplankton, after thousands of years if you go and see there, a complete forest would have developed on such barren area. So, that is it takes thousands of years for climax community to reach. So, this is about pioneer species and climax community. So, usually climax community in pond, it is very easy for us to identify. When you are traveling here and there, if you are a frequent traveler, if you visit that place quite often and if you start observing a pond or something that is there, then you can understand. The best example that we can take of is Kukrali Lake also. Kukrali Lake, there also you can see how the marshes and all that are starting to develop. Maybe can't say another 100 of years, half of the Kukrali Lake might not be there because of this particular ecological succession. So, there are different examples that you get to see around. Only thing is you need to notice them. So, I hope you understood this particular session wherein we studied about the ecological pyramids and also we studied about ecological succession. So, in the next coming session, we shall study about the last component of the ecosystem, that is nutrient cycling. So, in nutrient cycling, we shall study about carbon cycle and phosphorus cycle, which are the two important cycles that have been given in your textbook. So, we will concentrate on these two cycles, what exactly happens there. So, we shall meet again in the coming session. Thank you.